Dr. Sarah Chen never imagined that the worst day of her career would become the most important night of her life. When she refused to falsify medical records to protect the hospital's bottom line, they escorted her out before lunch. But when a classified military operation went catastrophically wrong just miles away, the Green Berets didn't care about hospital politics. They only knew one name: the trauma surgeon who'd saved more lives in combat zones than anyone else in the state. The one doctor who could navigate the impossible. The same doctor who was now sitting in her car in the parking lot, belongings in a cardboard box, watching the emergency lights pierce the darkness as desperate voices called out for her. The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital had never seemed harsher than they did that Tuesday morning. Dr. Sarah Chen sat across from Hospital Administrator Richard Moorfield and the hospital's legal counsel, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the storm brewing in her chest. The conference room felt smaller than usual, the walls seeming to close in as Moorfield slid a manila folder across the polished mahogany table. "Dr. Chen, we need you to amend these patient reports," Moorfield said, his voice carrying that particular blend of corporate smoothness and barely concealed threat that she'd come to recognize over her 8 years at St. Michael's. "The insurance auditors are raising questions about our billing practices in the trauma department. Some of the procedures you've documented are being flagged as unnecessary." Sarah opened the folder, her dark eyes scanning the documents with the same precision she brought to reading CT scans. These weren't just random charts. They were her patients. Michael Rodriguez, the construction worker who'd fallen 3 stories and whose internal bleeding she'd caught just in time. Jennifer Park, the car accident victim whose compound fractures had required immediate surgical intervention. Thomas Okonkwo, whose seemingly minor motorcycle accident had masked a life-threatening aortic dissection that only her experience had detected. "These procedures weren't unnecessary," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady. "They were life-saving. Michael Rodriguez would have died from internal hemorrhaging within 2 hours if I hadn't ordered that emergency exploratory surgery. Jennifer Park would have lost her leg to compartment syndrome. Thomas Okonkwo's aortic dissection would have killed him before morning." The legal counsel, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Winters, leaned forward. "Dr. Chen, we're not questioning your medical judgment in the moment. We're asking you to reconsider your documentation. Perhaps these could be classified as preventive rather than emergency procedures. Perhaps some of the imaging could be characterized as precautionary rather than diagnostic." Sarah felt the heat rising in her face, but years of maintaining composure in operating rooms kept her voice level. "You're asking me to commit fraud. You want me to lie about why I treated my patients so that the hospital can avoid paying insurance penalties for high-cost emergency interventions." Moorfield's expression hardened. "We're asking you to be a team player, Dr. Chen. This hospital is facing significant financial pressures. The trauma department is under particular scrutiny. We need to show that we're operating efficiently and not over-treating patients." "Over-treating?" Sarah's voice finally rose, though she kept it controlled. "I took an oath to do no harm. That includes not letting patients die because treating them costs too much. These people trusted me with their lives. I'm not going to betray that trust by falsifying records to make the hospital's balance sheet look better." The room fell silent. Patricia Winters and Moorfield exchanged a look, and Sarah knew what was coming before Moorfield opened his mouth. "Dr. Chen, your contract with St. Michael's Hospital includes a clause about cooperation with administrative requirements and adherence to hospital policies. Your refusal to work with us on this matter constitutes a violation of that contract." He pulled out another folder, this one thinner. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. You'll be compensated for the remainder of this month, and your benefits will continue for 60 days as per your contract. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." Sarah sat perfectly still for a moment, processing the surreal nature of what was happening. She'd spent 8 years building the trauma program at St. Michael's. She'd trained residents, mentored young surgeons, and saved countless lives. Before this, she'd done 3 tours in military field hospitals, Afghanistan twice, Iraq once, where she'd earned a reputation as the surgeon who could stabilize anyone, who never gave up, who found solutions when everyone else saw impossible cases. And now she was being fired for refusing to lie. "I understand," she said finally, rising from her chair with the same grace she'd maintained throughout the meeting. "I assume you'll be informing the trauma department of my departure." Moorfield had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We'll handle the transition. Dr. Morrison will take over as interim trauma chief." Sarah almost laughed. Jeffrey Morrison was a competent general surgeon, but he had no trauma specialization, no combat medicine experience, no instinct for the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death in an emergency room. But that wasn't her problem anymore. Security guard Tom Martinez, who'd always greeted her warmly during her late-night shifts, looked miserable as he escorted her to her office. "Dr. Chen, I'm sorry about this," he murmured as they walked through the familiar corridors. "Everyone knows you're the best surgeon here." "Thanks, Tom," she replied, managing a small smile. "Just doing what's right." Her office felt strange as she packed. 8 years of her life fit into a single cardboard box. Her diplomas and certifications, family photos, her grandfather's antique stethoscope, a few medical journals with her published articles, and the plaque from her unit in Afghanistan for extraordinary service in combat medicine. She ran her fingers over the engraving, remembering the young soldiers she'd saved, the impossible situations she'd navigated, the weight of knowing that her hands held the balance between life and death. By noon, she was sitting in her car in the parking lot, the box on the passenger seat, staring at the hospital where she'd given so much. Her phone buzzed with texts from colleagues who'd already heard the news, expressing shock and support. But she couldn't bring herself to respond yet. She just sat there as the sun climbed higher, wondering what came next, knowing that standing up for her principles had been right, but feeling the crushing weight of consequence nonetheless. She had no idea that in a few hours, the same principles that cost her everything would be exactly what would make her irreplaceable. Sarah was still in the parking lot at 11:47 p.m., having spent the day in a haze of phone calls to lawyer friends, former colleagues from her military days, and her parents, who were supportive but worried. She'd been too emotionally exhausted to drive home, instead sitting in her car, scrolling through job listings with mounting despair. Trauma surgeons with her qualifications weren't exactly common, but word traveled fast in medical circles, and she knew the difficult label would follow her. The first indication something was wrong came as a distant rhythmic thumping that she felt more than heard. Then the sound crystallized, helicopter rotors, multiple aircraft coming in fast and low. Sarah's military training kicked in immediately. This wasn't a routine medical transport. This was something else. The emergency room entrance suddenly flooded with light as military vehicles screeched into the ambulance bay. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the configuration. Humvees in tactical formation, men in full combat gear, and the distinctive berets that marked them as special forces. Green Berets. And they were carrying wounded. She was out of her car before she'd made a conscious decision to move, the cardboard box forgotten as muscle memory and training overrode everything else. As she ran toward the emergency entrance, she could see the chaos unfolding. There were at least 6 wounded soldiers, and the regular ER staff was clearly overwhelmed. "Where's Dr. Chen?" The shout cut through the noise. It came from a Green Beret captain whose uniform was splattered with blood, whether his own or someone else's. Sarah couldn't tell. "We were told Dr. Chen is the trauma chief here. We need her now." One of the ER nurses, Monica, who'd worked with Sarah for years, looked stricken. She was let go this morning. Dr. Morrison's in surgery with a cardiac case," another nurse interrupted. "He can't break away." The captain's face went white beneath the dirt and camouflage paint. "You don't understand. We have a catastrophic training accident. Live fire exercise went wrong. Multiple GSWs, blast injuries, possible internal bleeding. We need the best trauma surgeon in the state, and everyone told us that's Chen. I have boys dying." Sarah stepped into the light. "I'm Dr. Chen." Every head turned. The captain's eyes locked onto her, and she saw the desperate hope flood his face. "Doctor, thank God. Can you help us?" "I don't work here anymore," Sarah said, and watched that hope start to fade. Then she continued, "But I'm still a doctor, and I still took an oath. Tom," she called to the security guard who'd escorted her out hours before, Get me through those doors. Monica, prep trauma bay 1 through 3. I need a full surgical team now. The ER erupted into controlled chaos. Monica was already on the phone, pulling in off-duty staff. Tom held the door open, not even questioning the authority in Sarah's voice. The Green Berets were already moving wounded toward the trauma bays. Brief me while we move, Sarah commanded the captain, falling into step beside the first stretcher. The soldier on it couldn't have been more than 22, his face pale with shock, a tourniquet on his right leg, and blood seeping through the bandaging on his torso. Training exercise at Fort Morrison, 40 miles north, the captain said rapidly. Live ammunition, night maneuvers. Something went wrong with the targeting coordinates. We had friendly fire into a squad position, then a secondary explosion, fuel drums, 6 wounded, 2 critical. We couldn't risk the flight time to the military hospital in Norfolk. Someone in command said you were closer and better. Sarah was already assessing the first patient, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Pulse is thready, BP dropping. This one's going straight to OR. What's his name? Sergeant James Cooper, 23 years old, a young Green Beret said, his voice cracking. He's my best friend. Then you tell Sergeant Cooper he's in good hands, Sarah said, making eye contact with the young soldier. I've done this before. Afghanistan, Iraq. I know combat trauma. He's going to make it. She didn't know if that was true yet, but she knew the power of certainty in crisis. The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled emergency. Sarah moved between trauma bays like a conductor leading an orchestra, her years of combat medicine experience taking over. She stabilized a soldier with a sucking chest wound, performed emergency surgery on another with severe abdominal bleeding, and coordinated with the surgical team on a complex vascular injury that would have been fatal in less experienced hands. Dr. Morrison emerged from his cardiac surgery at 1:30 a.m. to find the ER transformed into something resembling a combat field hospital. He stood frozen as Sarah emerged from Trauma Bay 2, her borrowed scrubs covered in blood, calmly giving orders to nurses who obeyed without question. Dr. Chen, he stammered. I heard what happened. I mean, earlier today. I didn't know you were... Sarah barely glanced at him. Dr. Morrison, I need you on the soldier in Bay 3. Orthopedic consult for multiple fractures. Can you handle that? Yes, of course. He hurried off, and Sarah turned back to her patients. By 3 a.m., all 6 soldiers were stabilized. 2 were in post-op recovery, 3 were in the ICU but stable, and 1, Sergeant Cooper, was still in surgery, but Sarah had handed him off to the vascular team with detailed notes and confidence that he'd survive. The Green Beret captain found her in the hallway, where she'd finally stopped moving long enough to lean against the wall, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. He stood at attention despite his own injuries. She'd noticed the bandaging on his arm, but he'd refused treatment until his men were cared for. Dr. Chen, he said formally. Captain Marcus Washington, 3rd Special Forces Group. On behalf of my team and the United States Army, thank you. You saved my soldiers' lives tonight. Sarah nodded wearily. Just doing my job, Captain. A job you don't even have anymore, from what I understand. His eyes were sharp despite his fatigue. That seems like something that needs to be fixed. Before Sarah could respond, Hospital Administrator Richard Moorfield came striding down the hall, his suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled from being called in at midnight. Behind him was Patricia Winters, the legal counsel, looking equally uncomfortable in hastily thrown-on clothes. Dr. Chen, Moorfield began, his voice trying for authority but landing somewhere around pleading. We need to talk about tonight, about your actions here. We're prepared to discuss reinstating your position, given the circumstances. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at Captain Washington, then at the trauma bays where 6 soldiers were alive because she'd been in the right place at the right time with the right skills. She thought about the box in her car, about the principles that had cost her this job, about the patients whose records they'd wanted her to falsify. No, she said simply. Moorfield blinked. I'm sorry. I said no. You fired me for refusing to commit fraud, for putting patients first. Nothing about tonight changes that. I helped those soldiers because they needed help and I could provide it. Not because I work here. She pushed off from the wall, standing straight despite her exhaustion. But I will tell you this. I'm reporting your attempts to coerce me into falsifying medical records to the State Medical Board, the Insurance Commission, and the AMA. What you're doing isn't just unethical, it's illegal, and it puts patients at risk. She turned to Captain Washington. Captain, your arm needs proper treatment. Let's get you into an exam room. As she walked away, she heard Moorfield sputtering behind her, heard Patricia Winters trying to talk about legal implications, heard other voices joining the conversation, but none of it mattered right now. What mattered was that 6 soldiers would see tomorrow because she'd been there. What mattered was that she'd kept her oath. What mattered was that sometimes being fired at noon meant being exactly where you needed to be by midnight. The story would spread quickly. The surgeon who saved Green Berets the same day her hospital threw her away. Within a week, she'd have job offers from 3 major hospitals and a military advisory position. Within a month, St. Michael's would be under investigation, and Richard Moorfield would be the one leaving with a box. But that night, in that moment, Sarah Chen simply treated Captain Washington's wounds, checked on her 6 patients one more time, and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the day. She'd lost a job, but kept her soul, and somehow, when it mattered most, that had been enough.